Welcome to the Yoga Energy with Katie podcast. I'm your host, Katie O'Byrne. I'm a yoga and Reiki teacher and I am obsessed with learning. I can't wait to share with you some of the things that we learn here on this podcast. So stay tuned for some weird and wonderful conversations. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Yoga Energy with Katie podcast. I just finished doing my Saraswati mantra before I started recording this intro. I spoke about that last week about how Saraswati is the goddess of language and knowledge. So I feel much more prepared today. I also have written a few notes about what I want to say, so that's helping me to feel prepared. Because I often have lots of ideas for podcast episodes, for Instagram posts, for my workshops and classes and retreats, lots of like business ideas and things like that. But I find it really hard to stay focused enough to go through with a lot of them. I'm naturally a very Vata dominant person, which means I have a lot of the air element within me and I can be very like flighty. So to bring balance back to myself, I need to bring more of the earth element in. So things like just having a routine, although routine often feels like it's not my nature, but it's very good for me. I can be often resistant to routine. I do like to be very spontaneous, but routine is good for me. It helps me to feel balanced. It helps me to feel I have structure and stability, and practices that ground me really help me to follow through on ideas that I get a lot of. I do also have a lot of the Pitta dosha, which is like the fire element. So when I do decide on a plan, I'll be so determined to give it my all. And it can lead me to the Pitta dosha, the fire element, can lead me to getting like really hot headed and to react quite quickly. So again, I need to feel really grounded and to bring in that energy of the earth. I do things like some breath work, really focusing on my exhales. My mantra meditation really supports me. And literally just having my feet on the ground, just trying to slow things down because I can be like just wanting to rush out the gate with things. And this can lead me to like kind of burning out quite quickly, actually, if I'm not careful. But this got me thinking about self-study, which is obviously a massive part of yoga. Svadhyaya is the practice of self-study, so getting to know yourself. And I'm going to go a bit more into this after this week's episode. So I'll do an outro to the podcast as well if you want to stay tuned to listen to just a couple of thoughts I have on self-study. But also I'm going to just chat about how this self-study can lead us more into alignment in our life. And it also brought me onto the idea of voting, because we had elections here in Ireland yesterday, but we actually vote every single day. So I'm going to talk about that in the outro because this is quite a long episode. Myself and Jeanie Jyanti have a fabulous conversation. She is a yoga teacher from Cork. I came across her a couple of years ago because she actually had her own podcast called Yoga Un-Corked Podcast, which I thought was a really clever name. I love the name of it. And it's a very interesting podcast. I'm going to link the podcast in the show notes if you want to check her podcast out. But what really drew me to want to speak to Jeanie is a lot of what she's posting on Instagram at the moment and the work that she's doing with her teacher trainings. To me, it seems very interesting that she is taking it's not even a very different approach, but she seems to have a very conscious way in how she wants to share yoga and how she wants to train new teachers, which I find very interesting. And we also speak a lot about, I suppose, the yoga industry and how it can be inaccessible to people, how yoga can feel like it's only for a certain demographic. So a lot of the work that she is doing and a lot of the trainings that she's undergone herself have helped her to open up yoga to lots of people who may not have felt welcome or may not have been able to afford some of the offerings that she has given. So, yeah, I will let you listen to this week's episode. Before we get into this week's episode, just a quick reminder, my online classes are every Thursday evening at 8:30 p.m. Irish time. I would love to see you on my little Zoom box. And these classes are really open to a whole range of people. You don't need to be able to get down onto the ground onto a yoga mat. If you are more comfortable sitting up on your bed or sitting on a chair, that's absolutely fine. You can still join these classes. Like we talk about in this week's episode, yoga is more about, when we practice yoga asana, it's more about understanding what the purpose of the pose is. Well, then we can find different ways to do that. The poses and the practice doesn't need to look a certain way. It's all about how it makes you feel. It is a very relaxed yoga class to help you prepare for sleep. Recordings are available. I've also just launched a new website, which has been frustrating and very satisfying at the same time. I actually really like working on my website. I've always done kind of all the work on my websites myself. I like to have full control over what goes up on my website and when it goes up. So I do enjoy it, but it takes a lot of time. So I've just launched the new website. So please check it out and subscribe to my mailing list if you want to receive new blog posts and newsletters from me. So, yeah, wherever you're listening from, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey, hi, Jeanie. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. Well, there's loads I want to talk to you about anyway, and I'm sure the conversation will just start to flow once we get into it. But I just saw recently you have a retreat in India coming up, and I do want to talk about that. That sounds really, really exciting, but maybe we'll come back to that a bit later because I know we'll have lots to talk about around that, because I know I love my time in India, and there's definitely something very special about the country, but also practicing yoga there. And maybe that we can talk about some of the differences in the practices. But like I said, maybe we'll come back to that. The main thing when I was kind of searching through Instagram and like who will I get to come on the podcast, and one of your posts had popped up, and I was looking, I was like, some of the things that you say on your Instagram, they're just so on point, and you just say it with such clarity, and that really intrigued me anyway. And I had been listening to your podcast last year as well, which I'm sure we'll chat about as well. Um, so yeah, you've been doing loads. You're a busy woman.
I know. And I love it, but I also need to remind myself, just because you can do it doesn't mean you have to do it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I get so excited and so passionate about these things, and I yeah, I feel like I felt so fortunate to have amazing teachers and amazing people like along my journey into yoga. Um, and if I can even be half of that for people, I'm so happy to be. Um, but yeah, I think when it's a passion, and I
Mm.
like to remind people that I don't have children. I have a very supportive partner, and my time is very much my own, and I've
Mm.
made very conscious choices to be there. Um, and that's where I direct a lot of my energy. And so, if anyone out there is listening and they teach one class a week, or, they're like, oh, maybe I should be doing more, like, absolutely
Mm.
not, only if it's in alignment with what you want to do. And some of the best teachers I know teach one class a week or one class a
Mm.
month.
Mm.
Yoga doesn't have to be your career, I think, in order
Mm.
for you to be a really good yoga teacher, or for you to be a really good yogi. Like maybe you go to one class a month as a
Yeah.
student. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, no, because that's what I really wanted to talk to you about, is this whole idea of being a teacher and being a student, because you do teacher trainings,
Mhm.
and I love your attitude around, like, a lot of what's really important is just being a really good yoga student, and then maybe being a teacher can come after that. And because it's something that I would love to get into, is doing more trainings with people. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out a way I can do that without, I think one of your posts was quite similar, without just bringing more teachers out into the world. We don't necessarily need loads more yoga teachers, but like you said in your post, we do need more people living yoga. So how do you incorporate that into your trainings? Like, so if somebody signs up to be a yoga teacher, like what are you bringing into your trainings that are helping people to be better students?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One I have to think about myself a lot. And I was kind of assisting on yoga teacher trainings years before I actually started running my own. Um, and interestingly, people kept asking me, they're like, "Are you ever going to do a training? Like, I'd love to teach, to learn with you." And something never felt quite right. I felt like it was such a privilege and an honor to actually like be the introduction of people to teaching yoga.
Mm,
Um, and so I really just wanted to make sure I really wanted to wait and make sure it was the right time for me and for other people as well. So something I'm really passionate about is helping people deeply understand yoga first.
mm,
And then you don't need to remember all of this script, or you don't need to remember like the exact thing you're going to say for every class. Because if you felt it
mm,
and if you experienced it in your own body, that can be a really good place to start teaching it to others,
mm,
as opposed to, I'm going to give you a manual with 600 pages of writing, and we're going to sit in a room and we're going to read it through, and I'm not going to give you any like you know any help in helping people explore this in their own body. That doesn't make a
mm,
good teacher. And so on my trainings, we do a huge amount of actual practice. And I often say to people at the start, especially if it's a shorter training, if people are already teachers, let's say, and they're
mm,
coming for further training, like the first practice we do when they get there, I'm like, take your teacher hat off and be a student for this
mm,
class. And then maybe the next class, I'm like, put your teacher hat half on and have your student hat half on. And then as we go throughout the training, it's like you're becoming more in tune with, okay, now that I've experienced this in my body, how would I go about teaching it?
mm,
Um, so like that's not something really that I kind of consciously set out to do. It just kind of happened. And one of the first things I did when I started creating my trainings, which is like a huge amount of creative energy,
mm,
I didn't realize how much effort goes into them until I started doing them. Um, was like, what are the most important points that I need people to go away with?
mm,
Um, what do they have to be able to live and breathe it like so deeply that it's ingrained in their body? Because the rest will come.
mm.
I left one of my first trainings like knowing loads about the Bhagavad Gita, but I was like, well, what do I do with this now? How, like, okay, that's great. And it totally informed my life in a sense.
Mm,
But it was just there in the back of my mind, kind of being digested.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think a shorter answer to your question would be that it like yoga it is an experiential practice. So if
Mm,
people aren't doing yoga, um, how can they teach it? And teaching yoga and teaching people to teach yoga are very, very different things, and
mm,
they involve a lot. They involve some of the same skill sets, but um, yeah, it's there's a. I don't want to say one is more responsible than the other, but in a way, it
mm,
kind of is because
yeah, well, it is, yeah.
yeah. Um,
And you
but
you're saying about that creative, that big creative energy that you needed, because like I said, it's something that it feels close to, I feel close to being ready to step into that role, but also it feels like a massive step. And I just don't know if I have the energy right now to even think about, putting anything together. So like, where did you start with it? Do you do the trainings on your own? Do you have support in with other teachers? Like, where did you start with it all?
Yeah, so how my yoga teacher training started um was the ashram that I trained in India. I
Mm,
went back there the year after I finished. So I did my 300 hour there, I should say. I did my 200
mm,
hour elsewhere, but um I went back the year after just for like an immersion, just to stay there
mm,
for a few weeks and, reconnect with my practice and with yoga. And I was very much a student. And one day we went on a trip. I can't even remember where we went now, but I was sitting next to one of my friends from the ashram and we started talking about our passion for prenatal yoga, which is a lot of
mm,
what I teach. Um, and then like a few months later, she messaged me and she was like, and she ran trainings. She was like, I'm running this training in Greece. She's usually based in North America. So this was like one of her first European trainings. And she's like, would you come and be an assistant teacher? And I was like, absolutely. And that was very much a kind of immersive experience of
mm.
like, I taught a lot on that training, but also, it was her manual, her content,
Yeah.
very much aligned because we trained with the same teacher and the same style. Um, and then the next year, I applied to do a training in the ashram that was 100-hour lunar training, it was called. So it was
Wow.
50 hours a yin and 50 hours a restorative. And that was being run by one of my teachers in the ashram. And she messaged me a few weeks after I applied and she said, I just saw you applied for this training. Why are you coming? Like, you're trained in restorative and you're trained in yin. And I was like, honestly, I just want to come and be in the ashram
Mm,
and like refine my skills. And I said, it's been a few years since I've had like peer feedback on my
mm,
teaching, like
mm.
I'm teaching people, but no one is observing my teaching.
Yeah.
And then she said, oh, I was going to ask you to be the assistant on that training. Um, and she said, how about I give you feedback on your teaching, but also feedback on your teacher training? And I was like, oh my God, amazing. And it
Mm,
kind of slowly evolved from there. Um, and then honestly, it was actually just from people asking. They were like, oh, I'd love to learn more about this. Can you do a training? And I was kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll see. And then during COVID, it was terrible at the time, but
mm,
I see the clear path that was being created for me. But I I hate saying I lost the studio I was running. I chose to let it go. I just knew
mm.
I didn't want to get into massive debt paying rent. I
Yeah.
kept it open for 18 months during COVID, or just under 18 months. Around January 2021, I made the decision to close it. And so suddenly that created all of this space. Um, and it just kind of naturally evolved from there, to be honest. Um, and then I suppose this is a very long answer, but the
Good.
final piece was I was looking for a new studio because I think in my head I had the now what I realize limiting belief that I had to run a studio to be
Mm,
taken seriously in the yoga world, let's say.
mm.
Especially as this is my full-time job. And a lot of my friends aren't in yoga, like a lot of my school friends and stuff. And they're all super supportive, but I don't think people understand. They're like, oh, so you teach 6 classes a week. What are you doing? Like people often say, and what you do for your real job, or
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think in my head I had let that get to me, and I was looking for a new studio. And I was down with my very dear friend in Dingle who runs a beautiful retreat center. It's called Rail Teen Retreat Center.
Mm,
Derville is her name. She's also a yoga teacher. And, we were just lamenting over COVID and both our businesses. And like, I'm saying business, but like totally overlapped with our passion and what we feel is
mm.
our life purpose. We were being asked not to do that. So it was a lot of grief and a lot of sadness and a lot of fear actually about how are we going to make an income? Are we going to lose our homes?
Mm.
How will we feed ourselves? And I was quite worried about paying rent at the time. And she kind of said to me, this will always be your home if you're ever stuck, which
Mm,
was so beautiful.
absolutely.
And then within the same conversation, she had said, would you ever think of doing trainings? And I said, I will as soon as I find a home. And I meant another studio.
Mm,
And then we both looked at each other and we were like, hmm. And at the time, and I don't know still if there's anyone doing residential trainings in Ireland. I mean, it's a really popular way to train abroad, but
yeah. It doesn't
I
seem like
don't
there's a lot here. Yeah.
know. And it's because it's expensive, and I
Yeah.
totally understand. And so she was like, that's always kind of the line. She loves retreats, and it's lovely for people to be able to dip in and out of yoga through a
Mm,
retreat. But she's like, I've always wanted like Railteen to be a home of yoga and
Mm.
healing, basically. So we said, let's try it. And, we're able to do it relatively cheaply because Railteen is so beautiful. But it's basic, it's bunk beds and,
Mm.
it's shared bathrooms. Um, and the food is phenomenal. And the house is old, but it's full of character and it's full of love. So, it's not the double room ensuite kind of experience that people might expect in other retreat centers. It's a like
But
four
I
people in
think
a room.
that's such an expectation of retreats and trainings in Ireland that um makes it feel so inaccessible because it is so expensive to do it that way. And I don't have the money to do a lot of trainings and retreats in Ireland and like as a student. And so when you talk about something that's a bit more affordable for people, like it feels so like, thank God there's something that maybe would be accessible for me and lots of other people who are maybe on the same wage category as me or whatever. Um, because then, yeah, when you only see these, and they're beautiful places, but because they have a bit more luxury, they are a little bit more expensive, and it just makes it inaccessible for a lot of people, which
Yeah.
is makes me a bit sad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we're both really passionate about. Like every one of our trainings has scholarship places and
Mm,
we do payment plans as well. So like to give you an example, one of my students who graduated from my 200-hour course last July has only just finished paying a year later. And like
brilliant.
I do that completely on a
Yeah.
trust basis. And having done that now for 3 years, only ever once has someone let me down and not
Mm,
paid, and there was other stuff going on there. I won't even get into that now. And
mm,
that considering the amount of people who will message me and say, I'm just between jobs, I was paying 100 a month. It's going to be, 6 weeks before I can get that to you. And like
mm.
99% of people have such honor and respect with
Yeah.
that. Because just like you said, I can't afford to do a lot
Yeah.
of trainings either. And it even like broaden that out to like there's a lot of yoga classes, like not that I can't afford, but like it's I have to really stop and think before I
Mm,
go.
mm,
If I want to really pay that money, do I really need that style of yoga right now? Do I really align with that teacher right now? And what's starting to happen, or what is happening really, is a very financially abundant group of people
mm,
going to and teaching yoga. And there's
mm.
nothing wrong with that, but it's a one demographic.
Yeah.
And more often than not, financial abundance is a privilege, not something
Mm,
you've earned. And
mm,
that might be hard to swallow for some people listening. Often it is earned,
mm,
but it's not always. Like it takes money to make money,
mm,
literally.
mm.
Um, and so especially if those people are unaware of their privilege, it starts to become a real elitist
Yeah.
practice. And that's the opposite of what yoga is.
Yeah.
So that's something we're really passionate about.
So how
You
do
know,
you promote that in a way that maybe people who are not from that demographic that we're talking about feel more comfortable being in that space? Because I feel things that I've offered, like that scholarship places or like on my website, there's always a space for somebody who can't afford a class or they just feel they need the class, but people don't really use it. And I'm thinking, is it because, people don't want charity? People
mhm.
don't want to feel like, they're being given something for with nothing in return or whatever. But so it's hard to put it out there sometimes and yeah, make people feel welcome and like they're not being a burden financially or whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, how do you put that
It-
out there?
It's something I'm always battling with, actually, to be honest, because I totally agree with you. Like, no, people don't want charity. What's actually really interesting, which I've noticed now, this is a generalization, and of course, there's
Mm,
exceptions to this, but often the people with less financial abundance are more dedicated, more they want to pay more than the
mm,
people. Often there's a sense of entitlement when you
mm,
have a lot of financial privilege, not always. And so I do it a few ways. I do a full scholarship place, which means they don't pay. And then something that I started to notice is I check in as well. do you need financial or practical help actually getting there? Like petrol
Mm,
money, because, or sometimes rarely do you need to buy anything to do the training. But if there is, I'll often lend people stuff or things like
mm,
that. And then the other thing I offer is part scholarships. So it would be like all the expenses are paid plus a little bit extra. And then that can be paid as a payment plan as well. And that definitely tends to sit better with people.
mm.
Um, I learned a lot of how to do this through Accessible Yoga School. I don't know if you've learned or heard about those.
No,
Jivana
I haven't.
Heyman is the main, I suppose the main, I
I
know he's a
think I
huge,
have. Is he American based?
he is, and
Yes, I think I
you might
actually
know
follow him on
him.
Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah, he puts up like split screens of him doing a
Yes.
yoga posture in a chair. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He's
Um,
wonderful.
he's amazing. And I just trained with him in person in London a few
Wow.
weeks ago, actually, which was beautiful. Um, but he was offering lots online during COVID, which he still is actually, which has made it even more accessible.
Mm,
And I did I think it was like a 10-hour course on how to make yoga accessible. And we talked about the financial side of things. So I learned a lot of this from him. And I think it's a little bit different when it's like a drop-in class or something that people, but one thing that they suggested, which appears to work, and it might mean a bit of admin your end, especially if you don't have a booking system, but is to offer sliding scale or even
mm,
3 payment options. And that's something that I do a lot. So like, the suggested price might be €10, but if you're in abundance, it might be 15. And if you're not, it might be 5.
mm,
And what I noticed was, and this is something that they said they've noticed too in all the people who are doing the training, is that the majority of people pay 15. I'm just using
mm.
those numbers as an example.
Yeah.
Um, and what actually starts to happen is the people who wouldn't blink an eye at spending 15 take a moment to stop and say, aren't I so lucky to have this privilege
Mm,
of abundance financially? And then only the people who really need it pay the 5,
yeah.
they're still paying. It's
Yeah.
not charity. They absolutely deserve to be there.
Mm,
Um, or the other option would be to maybe do a donation based.
yeah.
Um, and there was a woman on the training who said she used to do donation based. And, she had kind of calculated to cover her costs and expenses and her time that if most people paid, this was in America, $8, she'd be well resourced. And she said the average price per person was about $14.
Yeah.
So people ended up again paying more because it gave them that moment of, God, I'm really lucky that I don't even have to think about this.
Yeah. I've always
Um,
found that because I've done donation classes over the years and people are always so generous. And it's at the start, it kind of shocked me. You know, I don't know why I had a belief that people would try and take advantage of it, but nobody ever did. Nobody ever took advantage of it. People were really, really generous with their money. And it like you said about, you had that one bad experience that someone didn't pay or whatever it was. Um, I think more often than not, people are honest and generous with their time and their money and everything. So it just, yeah, situations like that where there's donation, it just proves that, and it's lovely.
the other thing to answer your question that I really try and help people realize in the whole group setting. So let's say the teacher training, nobody knows who the scholarship person is
Mm,
unless they themselves want to divulge. Um, but it's like you're all welcome here,
mm,
like I'm not doing this so I can pat myself on the back and feel great
mm,
about myself. I'm doing this because I want more diversity in
mm,
yoga. um well, I don't even I'm centering myself in that, but it's like we need more diversity in yoga. um Yoga should be for everyone. And
mm,
I don't uh ask them outright to go home and share what they've learned freely. And I don't mean financially freely, but
mm,
it's like hopefully throughout the practice and throughout the course, help them realize that if you've felt nourished by this practice, and you've gotten the scholarship, can you then pay that forward in some way? And it's
mm,
that you do
mm,
an online class for free. So you've no expenses by your time, or something else. Like try and think of ways. And like, let's say you're living in the center of Dublin, rent is high, you're financially not that abundant, you need to cover your costs. It might not be practical for you to give out scholarship places to your class, or
mm,
maybe the studio you're working in won't allow it. Then it's totally okay, I think, as a teacher to teach those classes, to give yoga to people, share your love of yoga with people, and then maybe once a month do a free online class,
Mm.
or, you know, something else you're offering, like outdoor yoga where you're not limited to numbers, perhaps, that people are welcome to come for free. It doesn't have to be every single thing
Yeah.
the same way. Or maybe you teach 2 or 3 corporate classes a week that are very financially rewarding, and
Mm.
then you can teach once a week out in the park for free or for donation or for charity or something.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't have to be
Because I had this
essential.
conversation with Alice Harrison. She was on the podcast last week about, as you start to grow a business, like she is organizing the yoga picnic, and it's starting to grow over the last couple of years. And, we spoke about how when things do start to grow and you become maybe more successful with whatever you're doing, how do you keep your yoga values around that? Because it can start to, the business of it can take over, and you can start to think like, oh, I need to do it this way now to stay popular or relevant or whatever it is. Like, but if we are teaching yoga, like we really have to stick to the principles of what yoga is all about. And for me, like the business has to kind of come second.
Yeah, I must go back and listen to that episode. I'm sure it's so interesting. It's something actually I noticed in the first training I did. Um, it was exactly what I needed at the time. It's so supported me. But I noticed at the next few years that I was like, I'm actually not that much in alignment with how I felt that school was running their business. I personally felt, now I don't know the inner workings of it,
Mm,
but that I felt like it was like 80 to 90% of the decisions were to make money, and then yoga was a secondary. And I am not at all sitting here now and telling you that you need to be poor
mm,
and need to give up all of the comforts to be a good yoga teacher. But when I found my now teacher after lots of searching, and I did my 300 hour there and have subsequently gone back lots of times, um, I went over there with very critical eyes. Like I was
mm,
like, this training needs to, I felt like I didn't really align with the first one. And so this training I'm watching now, I'm seeing, because you kind of fall in love with your first yoga teacher, don't you? Like you're kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
like
yeah,
in awe of them. And
yeah.
exactly as I said, it served the exact purpose of what I needed at the time. But anyway, in one of our classes during the 300 hour, it was like a business of yoga class, and they had brought in someone who owns a studio in Canada, and with like 4 rooms in the studio, like a big business, and they had
Mm,
other people there. And they opened the floor to questions. And I specifically looked at my teacher, who's Vishvketu, or Vishvaji is his name. And I said, you've built an international business. The ashram holds about 70 people. It's full pretty much the whole year. He splits his time between India and Canada. Um, you know, could be all across Europe, running workshops and in festivals and stuff. Like there's a team of about 50 people, I'd say,
mm,
behind the scenes. And I just said to him, when you're as the head of this organization, like it's an institute, it's actually connected with Haridwar University.
mm,
Um, when you're making decisions, how much of the focus is yoga and how much is business? And I really valued, he paused for ages
mm,
and he really thought about it. And he said, honestly, he said, he said, I'd love to say 80% yoga, 20% business. But he said, honestly, it's about 60 to 70% yoga and 30 to 40% business. And he
mm,
said, most of the time, especially if we're trying to increase, expand, grow the business, it's probably 60% yoga, 40% business. But he
mm.
said, yoga is always, always higher.
Yeah.
And I suppose I felt really inspired by that because it was
Yeah.
a really honest answer. Because if he hadn't focused on the business, that ashram wouldn't have, they wouldn't have built another 2 floors to allow
Yeah.
more people to stay. Or, they wouldn't have been able to update the toilet system so that we all don't have to squat anymore. Or,
Yeah.
all of these things.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I really respected that, and I felt quite inspired by it. And so
Mm,
that is what and how I try and run my business,
mm,
is that, like, you know, there's some things that I do that are quite financially abundant, but I feel like, and I hope like, and people have told me that they feel like it's also very it's very uh not profitable, what's the word I'm thinking? Like beneficial for them. They didn't feel like it was a huge expense they had to put out there. And so like in our trainings in Dingle, in Rail Teen, it's like I'm well resourced financially. So is Dervla, who's there like cooking and hosting us and, you know, covering all those costs and effort. And the people who are coming, some people might not bat an eyelid at dropping, you know, so some of the weekend courses are €690, and that's including all your food and accommodation for the weekend. Some people will pay that in one go, not even think about it. And other people might pay €50 every 2 weeks. But that they still feel like it's of benefit to them. And that they still feel like it's, there's a word and I can't think of it. Beneficial is what's coming, but it's not that. I'll think of it and I'll probably shout it out now in a moment.
Okay. Feel free to shout it out whenever. But I was just thinking there, you were saying about your teacher and the percentage of yoga to business or whatever. But it just goes to show that we can lead with the yoga principles through any aspects of life. I mean, we're obviously just talking about business or whatever, because that's the business that we're in, but you can make it relevant to any aspect of life. And another, I feel like I just keep talking about your Instagram reels because that's the only way I know you is through Instagram, really. But you know, you spoke about how yoga is political, and a lot of people have a belief that it's not political. And I've had this real struggle, not just over the last couple of months, over the years I've had it in, you know, different situations. For me, it's absolutely political. Yoga has a connection to every part of my life. But I have been told by people, no, it's not political and it shouldn't be political and it should absolutely be separate. So yeah, I'd just love to hear you respond to
Yeah.
that in some way.
This is something else I've learned a lot from Jivana Heyman of Accessible Yoga School. Because he got into yoga as a teen through his grandmother in San Francisco, and he came out when he was 17 as a gay man, and that was right in the, I think, late 70s, early 80s, when the AIDS epidemic was massive in San Francisco. And he was like, all my friends are dying, you know, and why am I teaching them yoga when all my friends are dying? And, you know, through different social justice work and stuff, you realize actually these are really, really interlinked. And I definitely, in the first few years of my yoga, like, you know, my yoga teaching and yoga career, I would have been like, oh, love and light, everything should be happy, don't rock the boat kind of thing. But through, I suppose, trainings with him and listening to him and talking to him, realized, oh my God, we have not just a beautiful system by which to, like the system of yoga gives us a beautiful framework to tune into what we want for the world and what we want for our world. But we also have a responsibility as potential leaders in the community. And I'm not saying that, like, you know, that as we are better than our students, but it's like we potentially have a good platform where people are feeling really connected to themselves. And we're never, of course, going to tell people how to vote or, you know, what to do with their time or money. But what we can do is ask them questions, you know, like what, like, I feel the more yoga you do, I should say here, slight aside, like not just asana. Now, it will come through asana, but it's like the more holistic yoga you do, the more internal reflection you do, the more your inner world changes. And then you actually kind of have no choice but for your outer world to change. And when you're well rested, when your nervous system is balanced, when you feel really, really aligned, that's a brilliant place to go out and change the world from. If you're activated, if you're very binary, then that can often lead to a lot of strife and a lot of aggression. And it was interesting when Jivana calls himself an activist. I think my previous experience with activists had been quite violent, actually. And I particularly remember once in the ashram, someone who like identified themselves very heavily as a vegan activist, started chatting to me one day in the ashram and asked about my retreats. And I was explaining, you know, this is what I do. And he said, oh, well, I assume you don't serve any animal products on your retreats. And I said, oh God, I would never serve meat on my retreats. That's not in alignment with yoga. I'm not saying you can't be a yogi and eat meat. But I'm just saying on a yogurt treat, I wouldn't do that. I said, but I do serve local organic eggs and milk. I know the farmer, I get them from the market. And he went ballistic to the point where someone had to stand between us because he was actually going to get physically violent with me. And I was
Yeah.
so shocked. And
Yeah.
I totally, in a way, respect his passion for what he believes in. But like the thing he was talking, he's like, in yoga, we have ahimsa, which is non-violence.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to violently tell me that I was being violent to the, and I'm not saying my life is more to be more respected than an animal's, but
Yeah.
what would have been a lot more productive in that moment was for him to say, do you truly, truly, truly feel that that aligns with what you're trying to teach? And then I might have made a much, might have really
Yeah.
thought about it. Um, so when I first heard Jivana calling himself an activist, I was like, but he's the most peaceful man I've ever met, not ever met, and he's very human as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I started to realize that social justice doesn't have to be done through violence.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that is how it's done, and sometimes that has amazing results actually.
Mm.
Um, but it can be done very many other ways. And like, if you think, I know I mentioned at the start, I am absolutely not an expert on the Bhagavad Gita, by the way, but um, that is a book about social justice. Like Arjuna is having to make a decision. Does he do something against his own family? He's living out a war that's going on in his head. Um, does he follow his heart, what he truly believes is right, or does he make actions that might really, really hurt other people? So
Mm.
actually that book is asking us to reflect on the choices we make, and how we show up in the world. And again, like, I teach teacher trainings that are sold out and are very financially rewarding. And then every Tuesday night I teach in my community here. I don't live far from it, in Knocknaheeny in Cork, which would be one of the most socially deprived areas of Cork City. Um, and I mean real poverty, like, especially if you live in the suburbs and you're quite financially privileged. I don't think people realize that there's still people living in abject poverty in
Mm.
Cork or Dublin or wherever. Um, and that class I'm paid by, excuse me, I'm paid by the healthcare project that's set up in that area. And actually, very, no, it's not the most money I make, but it's definitely
Mm.
well covers my time and energy. And then those people pay €3 a class,
Mm.
and every single week they pay, even if it's 20 cents, they pay. And similar to what we were talking about earlier, if that class was free, they wouldn't come.
Yeah.
Um, and though, that class, that community is such a mix of people who live in that area and who money would be really, really tight. And then other people who maybe grew up in that area or live nearby still, or come from different parts of the city for the class. And we're all there together. It
Mm.
doesn't need to be wealthy people here and poor people here, or, skinny people here and fat people here, or, able-bodied people here and disabled body. It's like, can we work where, sorry, my cat just came. Sugar. I might just pause for 2 seconds. Just,
Yeah, you're okay.
no, she won't disturb us, but if she does,
That's okay.
we can just edit out the noise.
Yeah.
Um,
That's all right.
but yeah, we can all do yoga together and we'll all
Mm.
learn from each other. And to me, that's yoga. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that I try and do. And it's not always possible and it's not always easy, but you can do it to the best of your ability. Like,
Mm.
instead of doing a chair yoga class and a non-chair yoga class, can you tell everyone they're welcome? And some people are in a chair and some people aren't. And then
Mm.
actually maybe after 2 weeks, they're like, I don't really need the chair that much anymore. Or I'll use it for some postures and I won't for others.
Mm.
Or you might have someone completely able-bodied who's like, God, it actually feels way different to do this posture in a chair. So
Mm.
maybe I'll do that anyway. Again, that takes a lot of time as a teacher, um, to get to that point of being able to teach integrated classes. But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do is go right back to the start and have my 200-hour students learn that from the start. So it's actually that they're not unlearning a way of teaching yoga, but actually that's been the standard from the get-go.
Mm. Well, that's something you touched on it there, unlearning. I was thinking about that when you again, I keep reflecting back to your posts, because I was flicking through loads of them before we came on here, and you spoke about how the chakras actually in the traditional texts have nothing to do with the colors and things, you know, and I think he said about how it kind of it kind of shocked you in a way and made you feel like, oh God, am I lying to people? Or, you know, so it got me thinking about, like, I've been teaching a bit over 7 years or whatever, and I've definitely reflected back on things going, oh God, actually, maybe I shouldn't have taught that way, or what I was teaching was either misrepresenting something, or I had just understood it in the wrong way. And yeah, you do have to unlearn some things. And, you know, I think part of it is the journey. I mean, obviously we want to minimalize if we're teaching something wrong, but I think, is it maybe inevitable in some ways, because like we're just human and we make mistakes anyway. But yeah, I mean, definitely having that in mind from the get-go, from a 200 hour, is definitely beneficial. But I think we also have to be kind to ourselves as well. And I think students have to acknowledge that we're all just human. You said about how, like, your first yoga teacher, you kind of fall in love with them and stuff. And there's been times I've had to remind myself, no, they're just human as well, you know, and to question what they are saying, same as my students should question what I'm saying. And so I think students need to be able to take a responsibility for themselves and to not just be led blindly into something as well. So,
Mhm. Yeah, there's so much there. Like
mm,
I don't quote me on this because I'm not sure exactly, but I'm pretty sure that to become like a massage therapist, you do about 1,500 hours of training.
mm.
Like,
Yeah,
you know,
it's a lot more anatomy than a yoga teacher would
yeah.
do for sure.
So like when we look at a 200 hour, it might feel intense and it might feel like you learned so much, which you absolutely did, but you are a baby in the
Hmm.
journey. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's so beautiful because you will learn so much from going out there and teaching. You could do an 800-hour training and still you won't learn stuff till you go out there and you have students in front of you.
Mm.
So the way you're talking about my reels now, I'm going to talk about Jivana again. He said something recently, because I've just done a training with him, but he has really heavily influenced my teaching in the most beautiful way. Um, he said the best way, his most recent book, Teacher's Guide to Accessible Yoga, he says in that the best way to be a good teacher is to be a new teacher.
Mm.
So like when I look back at how I used to teach 10 years ago, like I'm such a different teacher now. But the thing we need to remember is that the students will find you at a time when they need you.
Yeah.
So if I thought the way I was teaching now, 10 years ago, potentially a lot of those students, it wouldn't have landed or it wouldn't have
Mm.
resonated. Or, so like that phrase, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So
It's so
if
true.
you're listening and you're a teacher and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I used to say that.
Mm.
Like, let there be, well, I don't want to say let there be no guilt and shame. Feel those things, actually, feel them, but then also realize that you're human and we're not asking for yoga teachers to be perfect. Sometimes I think we as teachers think we have to be, and also our students think we're perfect. And then there's a huge downfall when they realize we're not. It can be very upsetting. And it's actually one of the reasons we started the podcast, Yoga Uncorked. We were
Mm.
like, every yoga podcast, well, I had been listening to at the time, which were few actually, was like, oh, my perfect life. I'm just going to put down my green smoothie. And, I was up at 5 a.m. this morning doing my kriyas. And it's like, no, why can't we talk about yogis who enjoy a glass of wine on a Saturday night if they like, or,
Yeah.
whatever. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's an aside. Um, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, to be a new teacher. And it's something I also feel is missing from a lot of trainings is the follow-on support.
Yes,
Um,
that's what I was going to
oh,
ask you about that as well, or bring that into conversation. Like you mentioned earlier on about a peer, what did you call it? Like a peer review or
peer
type
feedback.
thing. Feedback. Yeah, it's so difficult
Mhm.
to get that. I mean, because I never really taught in studios. I covered a couple of classes here and there, but I just kind of done my own thing. And I think about that a lot. I'm like, I have
Mhm.
nobody to kind of pull me up on things. So I do try to talk to other people. Like I have friends obviously that teach and we talk about things, and sometimes I get feedback from just conversations, but I do think some sort of peer feedback, like if I don't know, maybe I should set up a group or something that We go to each other's classes and say, oh, well, maybe this would have been more beneficial or da da da, whatever it is. But um, yeah, like the care after your training, you're kind of just left to your own devices.
Mm.
Unless,
Yeah.
and maybe it's different with your trainings because you do have that immersive training here in Ireland. Whereas I did my trainings in India, and actually after this 300 hour, we definitely have more support afterwards. But after the 200 hour, and even though it was the same school, it's just they put more in place now to kind of stay in touch and to keep groups together and follow on trainings and stuff like that. But yeah, it was quite lonely afterwards actually because I trained with people who live all over the world. And while I did keep in touch with them sometimes, like people were in America or just different countries. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, there's a few things there. Like I often say, some of the most common questions I get after a training from students is, how much do I charge? Like sometimes they're really simple stuff because you can
Mm,
find the answer to the, like, what muscle is that again? Or like, if
mm,
someone comes in with a knee injury, what do I do? You can find a lot of that stuff online.
mm.
But often it's the, like, we have I was doing it on Facebook for a while, like a Facebook group, but I realized not that many people use Facebook anymore. So we've changed it to like a WhatsApp like group.
Mm.
And every graduate of Alchemy School of Yoga, let's say, can choose to add themselves into that, because I know what group chats are like.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's like, we had one recently, a lady came into my class with broken ribs. What should I have done? They were like, I panicked. And I was like, I would have panicked
Mm.
as a senior teacher, not panicked, but I would have been like, there's very little you can
Yeah.
do when the
Yeah.
ribs are
Yeah.
broken. When you're breathing, you're going to be affecting that. So,
Mm.
just reminding that teacher, and like, it was so beautiful because I don't know, there's like probably 100 people, if not more, in there, with various levels of experience, various backgrounds, from doctors to physiotherapists to, energy workers to parents, and it's like, most of the time we're actually just letting people know you did exactly what you should have done.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you dealt with that really beautifully,
Mm.
and kind of that. No, and also giving advice when it's needed. Um, but I think the idea of, getting peer support is amazing. I think if you really trust that person, I think, to have someone sit in your class and kind of maybe give you feedback afterwards, if they have any sort of agenda that could be crippling for, your self-esteem or something. But it could just be, yeah, if it's someone you trust and you can do it for each other and you really like their teaching in their
Mm.
class. um and I remember before asking someone for peer feedback, and they were like, honestly, I can't think of anything. And I was really annoyed because I was like,
Yeah.
tell me
Yeah.
what I can do better. But then I was like, oh, and that's not to say I'm perfect at all, but I was like, they were like, I was so in the class that
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, brilliant. That's
That's
actually
good.
was
Yeah.
my intention, to help people
Mm.
go inwards. So maybe it has to be a bit more of a formal thing where they like sit at the back and like tune into the
Observe.
class and
Yeah.
observe or something. It's something I've been thinking about for a while. Like, would I offer some sort of kind of mentorship thing, especially with online now, that like someone could even just prop their phone in the corner of their class as they're teaching. Like, I don't need to see everyone, or,
Mm.
um, but again, it's a bit of time, maybe something for down the line.
Yeah.
I'd love to offer it, because instead of someone having to pay a fortune to go somewhere and do a training, like maybe they just need 2 or 3 hours of mentoring, where it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, actually that, or even something so simple as, the way you cued that was beautiful, but maybe you give this option first so that people, or something as simple as that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Watch this space.
Well, come here. I want to talk to you about India because you do have a retreat coming up. Then I know you've brought people on retreat to there before, and you've done your trainings there. Did you do your initial training in India, or when was the first time that you went and had done yoga there, or what drew you to going there? Like why travel all that way?
It's so interesting. I was in India 3 times before I discovered yoga. And yeah, I went and studied chemistry in university after school. And it wasn't until I was about 2 years in that I was like, everyone was like, oh, I'm going to get a job doing this, and I'm going to da, da, da. And I was like, oh, I don't want to work there at all. And they were like, well, why are you studying chemistry? And I was
Yeah.
like, it's a really good question. I just did it because I found it interesting in school. But anyway, because I liked the course, but I wasn't passionate about it.
Mm.
My summers in university were for exploration. Like I really
Yeah.
wanted to travel. So I always think back to my poor mother. I came home one day and I was like, I'm going to live in a slum in India for 4 months during the summer. And she was like, what?
Oh.
And to be fair to my beautiful mom, I got so much of my heart and my like philanthropic work from her. Like she was such a generous, kind, charitable person. And like from the get-go, from when we were born, it was like if you have two of something, you give one to someone who needs it, if you can, you
Mm.
know. Um, but I think and like this would have been 20 years ago. So this was we had the internet, but like pre-mobile phone kind of vibes.
Mm.
So she was like, okay, are you going to be safe? So went and did that. I lived in Delhi in a slum just outside Delhi for 4 months, and we were teaching in schools there. And that was an amazing experience. Um, and I'll never forget landing in Delhi airport. I don't know if you've flown in there. It's
Mm.
much fancier now, but 20 years ago it was pretty run down.
Mm.
And I remember the sliding doors open and just the heat
Yeah.
and the smells and the sounds. And I didn't quite have the language for it at the time, but now I realize what I felt was I felt at home, even though
Mm.
I was petrified and it was so overstimulating. But I was like, I've been here before, or I have a
Yeah.
connection with this place. And we did our 4 months and we traveled a bit. And then I came home and I just had fallen in love with India. And like my sister used to joke, she used to say, like, if I'd see someone who looked Indian on the street, I'd almost be like trying to catch their attention, you know. And my sister used to be like, you can't be friends with she's like, not every Indian person wants to be friends with you, Jean. And I was like, okay. um, and so I was seeking out other opportunities to go back. And then in Cork, we have an amazing charity called the Hope Foundation. And I saw that they were running a Yoga for Hope trip. So I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but like had kind of like heard of yoga, but didn't really know about it. And I did 2 trips with them and we did a little bit of yoga, but to me, it was exercise. You know, I was quite into exercise at the time.
Yeah.
I've always been a mover. I've always loved moving. But the people I met on that, oh my God, like the most deeply spiritual, open, kind, gorgeous humans. And so that kind of started to pique my interest. Maybe this yoga thing is kind of maybe it's more than just, you know, squats and standing on my
Mm.
head kind of stuff. And then I won't go through all the rest of the stuff, but a few years later, I discovered yoga in work. So I did end up working in a pharmaceutical company for a while, and we had yoga every Tuesday and Thursday. And the teacher was amazing. And I was like, I love this. And like I had originally planned to teach chemistry and maths. We're from a
Mm.
family of teachers. My brother's a teacher, my mom was a teacher. Um, and but then I was like, not many people want to learn chemistry and maths. And interestingly, actually, the day I got accepted for it was the HDIP at the time, but like the PME now, was the same day I got offered a permanent job in a pharmaceutical company. And I had to make that decision. Do I spend 12 or 13 grand going back to college, or do I take a permanent pensionable job? And I kind of took the pensionable job idea, but the teaching was still in the back of my mind.
Mm.
And through that job, discovered yoga more and was like, maybe I could teach yoga. And I had been teaching dance, actually. I danced all my life.
Okay.
So I was like, if I can teach dance, maybe I'd like to teach yoga. And honestly, that was the thought process. I signed up for a training. I'd say I'd done 20 classes max.
Yeah.
Um, I had no idea what style. I remember that teacher in the pharmaceutical company saying, you know, she knew I was leaving and I was going to do this. And she was like, what style of yoga is it? And I was like, just general yoga.
Yeah.
And she's like, is it Ashtanga? Is it Hatha? I was like, just yoga. So she thought I was insane. Um, so I did that 200 hour originally in Goa, and it was fabulous, as I said, but it was Ashtanga. And it did, at the time, I was 28, I think. I was quite lean and mobile, and I was able to do a lot of it. And then I thought I moved to Germany with the next partner at the time, and I was teaching there. And then I moved back to the UK with them as well. And it wasn't until I got back to the UK that I was like, started having a much older population coming to my classes. And
Mm.
I was like, Ashtanga is so not
Mm.
accessible for people who are older and bigger bodies.
Mm.
And I had been kind of modifying the practice anyway. So it was around then that I was like, actually, this isn't serving me. It's not serving my students. I'm not doing my own practice because
Mm.
I was taught originally that you have to do an hour and a half primary series every morning
Yeah.
or you're not a good human kind of
And
thing.
sorry to cut across you there, but you said
Oh,
you were kind of modifying yourself. Was that just something you learned to do because of the students that were coming to you and you kind of thought, well, they might need to do it this way? Did you just teach yourself that how to modify it?
yeah, that was necessity breeds
Yeah.
invention, like it was okay, you can't like in my head I was like, so wait, you can't cross your legs like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, they've got loads of flesh there. How could
Mm.
they unless they chop off their flesh? So
Yeah.
I think I've been lucky to have had a good understanding intuitively of the body,
Yeah.
having always moved. And then literally combined with, okay, if I understand what the intention of the posture here is, the intention is to twist, can we find another way to twist?
Yeah.
And then people will be like, oh my God, this feels great. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll try that too. And it's like, wow, actually, this is
Yeah.
really great. So it's been kind of like an evolvement of that. But it's something I'm not rigid on too many things, but if people leave my trainings knowing anything, it's the purpose of the posture.
Well,
So
that's
that,
what I was going to say to you. That's so
yeah.
important because, like, on a teacher training, I know we spoke about this, like, but there is usually a certain demographic and type of person that does yoga teacher training. So when you're on a training, you will generally be working with um slim, able-bodied people who are able to do these fancy looking poses. So when you're being taught how to teach these people, it's easy because they can already
Mhm.
do it and they kind of know what they're doing anyway. And then you go out into the real world and you've all different types of people coming to you. And then it's like, oh God, what do I do now? And you have to, but like you said, you hit the nail on the head. It's understanding the purpose of the pose. And um, yeah, and I like what you said about being intuitive as well and just try to see it from the other person's point of view. And actually a realization I had years ago, I did a sup yoga class in Barcelona on my holidays and I'd never been on a paddleboard before. And we were stepping the right foot forward into a lunge position. And I was like, I can't do it. And it was the first time ever I couldn't really do something like that. And then I was like, oh, this is how people feel in my class when they're not able to step their right foot through, easily. And I'm like, okay, so it was, yeah, I realized that I have to put myself in other people's shoes sometimes to realize, yeah, things need to be modified.
Yeah, beautiful. Great to have that realization. And
Mm,
even like, even on a stand-up paddleboard, you're used to the ground being still. And it's like,
yeah.
oh God, now the ground's moving. How do I, how do I get through with this? And even I've noticed like I'm probably 10 to 15 kilos heavier, like I've more flesh on me now than I did when I was in my early 20s. And like it wasn't until I went back to like a hot yoga class recently and Garandasana eagle pose. I
Mm,
used to always be able to wrap my legs all the way
mm,
around. I've quite mobile hips and knees. I'm hypermobile as well. And I couldn't do it. And I was like, why can't I do it? I'm still as flexible. And I was like, my flesh is in the way. My thighs are bigger, my calves are bigger.
mm,
And I was like, oh my God, my belly's bigger. And it's like, so actually everything I rewarded myself for doing was
mm,
actually purely due to how lean my body was and actually
mm,
not skill or, now the balance and all of that still
mm.
comes. So now I'm like, okay, my foot doesn't go behind my calf. Where is it going to go? It's going to go here. This feels really good. And I've
Yeah.
got way more energy to focus on squeezing my joints, getting a lovely compression. And then when I release it, it feels fantastic, as
Mm,
opposed to reaching a destination,
yeah. But it's
Um,
sometimes hard to encourage students to want to feel those things because you can see them struggling or pushing themselves to get into what they may think the pose, and I say this with air quotes, should look like,
yeah.
because they've seen it on Instagram or wherever they've seen it. And so they try to make it look a certain way, but it's all about how it feels. Like, how can I or how can I move my body into a way that it feels like the pose is designed to feel? Or
Mhm.
again, understanding the purpose of the pose.
Yeah, and that's our role as teachers. Like if we're teaching, and I've thought like this myself, so again, no shame if you've been teaching like this, but if we're teaching from a point of view of here is the pose, and
Mm,
if you can't do that, and then you're backtracking for people,
yeah.
that's going to lead to people striving for a pose that maybe their body will never be able to do, whatever about how much weight they lose or how much flesh they lose. It could be bone structure and you're not changing your bones.
Mm.
So instead, it's like, here's the purpose of the pose. The purpose of the pose is to compress our knees and hips, or the purpose of the pose is to twist. They know that from the outset, and you can literally just say that our intention here is to rotate the spine. Find a position where your body feels really, really rotated. You can put your hands here, here, or here. And those options are level. They're not graded. There's no intermediate, beginners, intermediate, advanced. There's no full expression. There's no modification. It's option. So what I'll often say when I'm teaching is, I can do this. I can, let's say when you're doing like a lunge twist and you do a bind with the elbow, let's say, I'll say, I can do this, but I get a lot more rotation when I actually lift my torso up and take my hand to my lower back and my knee. And people are going, oh, me too. And I'll also remind them that my body is very different from theirs. So actually maybe they'll play around with it. So our language as teachers is so important. Our demonstrations are so important. And there's enough in the world to criticize us and tell us we're not good enough. So the yoga practice should be the place where you come out going, God, my body's fucking phenomenal. Sorry if we can't curse on this.
Okay.
We're going to beat that out. And I walked into this class today and I'm able-bodied and I feel great. And I'm so grateful that my body is still working, you know, as opposed to if I just lose more weight, I'll be able to do that pose. Or if I just buy those leggings, I'll be a better yogi.
I finish my class a lot of the time with encouraging people to just feel a sense of gratitude for what their body was capable of, because actually the hall that I teach in is also a special needs school. And like a lot of what we were doing in the class that night, possibly some of the kids that attend that school might not be able to do because of different reasons. So even just having the gratitude that you're able to walk in to the yoga room is, and if you do no more than that, and people think I'm messing with them when I say, if you want to just come in and go asleep, if that's what you need, we don't need to be putting pressure on ourselves, like you said, for anything. Like there's enough of that in the world. So,
gorgeous. Yeah, what a great way.
Sense of gratitude
to leave people, you know. And also using your body when you do want to, you know, like there'll be times I'm just back from a hot yoga class now, and like I use that as my exercise, you know, like that's my testing my body, challenging my body, strengthening my body, detoxing my body. But, you know, then I'll do other stuff for my yoga practice, let's say. Because my body is strong and it's very capable, and I love at times, not always, testing it. So it's like there's no right or wrong way to be. And there'll be times when, and this is actually something I do love the Ashtanga practice for, or any practice that is kind of a set sequence, is that like today in the class, usually I do that class, no problem. I had to sit down in between each posture. Like I just was very warm today for some reason. And I think I ate a little bit too close to the class, so I felt a bit nauseous. There's other days I'll go in and do that without batting an eyelid, you know? So it's like, oh yeah, today's one of those days. That's okay. But yeah, it sounds like your students have great guidance there with that.
I went totally off track there because we were speaking about yoga in India, and we only got a tiny bit into your experience there. I didn't even hear about your first class over there.
Oh yeah. So I did the 200-hour and that was great. And I came back and I was teaching, but I realized I needed more. And one of the people I had met on that training was living in Colorado. That's where she's from. And we'd been chatting a lot. And she was the same. She's like, I want to do my 300-hour, but I don't want to go back there. I feel like I need more. And we started looking and we started thinking, we kept kind of coming up short. And we started looking, we were like, what's the best yoga class you've ever been to? And she remembered a class she had done in Costa Rica when she was traveling the year before. And she couldn't remember the style, but she was like, she remembers going up to the teacher and saying, I've been a yoga teacher for 3 years. I've been practicing for 10. That is the most amazing class I've ever been to. What was that? And she said, that's Akhanda yoga. So Lindsay managed to find this teacher on Akhanda, Akhanda. Akhanda means whole or unable to be broken into pieces, or kind of indivisible, I think is what it means in Sanskrit. And so Lindsay managed to find this teacher on Instagram and be like, you must think I'm so weird, but I did your class last year. Can you tell me where you trained? And she told her, and Lindsay just sent me a picture of Vishvketu, my now teacher. And I was like, sign me up. I was
Oh.
like, because I think I'd started to feel yoga had become very lonely and very sad and
Mm.
serious, actually. And
Mm.
any teacher I knew was quite sad and serious. And I just saw Vishwaji's smiling face, and I was like, I want to learn from someone who's happy.
Mm.
Since like I've been studying with him now for nearly 8 years, and like work in the ashram teaching behind the scenes. So I've seen him as a human as well as a teacher. He's not perfect. He's not always happy, but by and large, he's a very kind, caring, happy human. And I was like, I want to learn from someone like that. So I signed up to do my 300 hour there, which turned out to be actually nearly a 400 hour the way it worked out. We were there for 49 days, and very deep, immersive, experiential
Mm.
practice. And yeah, I've kind of been teaching that way since. Akhanda is Hatha based, and Vishwaji, he's Dr. Yogrishi Vishvketu. He's a PhD in yoga. He's from a long line of yogis.
Mm.
Um, and it's from the Nath lineage, which is one of the older lineages of Hatha yoga. And it's really simple. His thing is do fewer postures with more integrity. And it's called Akhanda because it's the entire yogic system in a class, in a sense. Obviously, there's a huge amount to the yogic system,
Mm.
but every practice has movement, meditation, mantra, philosophy, and breath work.
Mm.
And it's all weaved throughout the practice. So it's not like yoga here, then meditation here, and breathing at the start and end. It's the whole way through. Um, and he just gave it that name because when he started teaching in Canada, people were like, what's this? And he was like, this is just yoga. And they're like, we've never done this before. And he's like, because you've been doing asana. This is yoga.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we love having a label and a name for stuff. So he gave it the name Akhanda Yoga.
Yeah.
But yeah, India's just, I think India's Marmite, right? I've never heard anyone who just feels a neutral feeling towards
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like you either adore it or it had a really maybe not so pleasant reaction. You had
Yeah.
a not so pleasant reaction to it. Um, and the depth of spirituality there, even
Mm.
amongst the average person on the street,
Mm.
is massive.
Mm.
I'm not sure where you trained. This training was in Rishikesh, which is up the
Yeah.
north. Yeah,
Same.
was
Yeah.
that where you? Yeah.
It's in Rishikesh.
Um,
Yeah.
and Rishikesh, even in the last 8 years, I've noticed has changed massively.
Mm.
Um, Not always for the better. But it's still kind of the home of yoga, or where they say yoga originated. And so there's just parts of it that you learn. And I don't think you have to go to India to be a good teacher. And I don't
No.
think you have to go to India to understand yoga.
No.
But understanding and honoring where it comes from, I do think is really
Mm.
important. And it's something I'm still tuning into. But I don't know if you've seen there's a big wave of people online saying you shouldn't say namaste at the end of a class.
Yeah.
Honestly, my heart breaks when I see that. And look, maybe I have a lot more work to do. I'm still looking into it. But every
Yeah.
single class I've ever been to in India, you say namaste at the end of the class. Now,
Yeah.
if you're selling t-shirts that say namaste in bed and you're profiting off them,
Yeah.
I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
But what I would say now at the end of my classes is to honor and respect where this practice has come from and all
Mm.
the teachers who've shared it. If you'd like to join me in bowing your heads, namaste.
Mm.
Namaste means I bow to you, you bow to me. It's a way
Yeah.
of mutually respecting ourselves, the practice,
Yeah.
and each other at the end of the class,
My view on that is, so like that, any teacher I've had in India would say namaste to say hello to you on the street, or they would say it at the end of the class as well, often. And how I use it in the class, because I use some other Sanskrit words as well, and I try to honor the meaning of the posture names and different things like that. But how I use it at the end of class is, for me, Shavasana is a time where, it's corpse pose, obviously, and we're kind of letting go of part of us. And then it's like this reawakening, and it's this new opportunity to start again. So it is like saying hello to everyone. And at the end of our class, we all turn to each other and say namaste. So it can be, you can say hello to the person next to you, or you can say that you're bowing to the person next to you and thanking them for sharing the energy and different things like that as well. So it is about how you use it and honor the place it comes from. And obviously there's a way of, you know, disrespecting it, like you said, with the t-shirts and things like that. But
Mhm.
yeah, for me, I feel not very strongly. I don't want to say I'm attached to, maybe I am attached to using it in my class actually. But yeah, for me, it's just a beautiful way to connect to some of the people that taught me yoga and to the place that it comes from.
Yeah, like I teach in a school. Sometimes I teach these 6 classes. I just do it once a year. And I always start by asking the kids, where do you think yoga comes from? And every single one of them says Japan. And I'm like, what?
Oh,
And I think it's the bowing, actually. I think it's that
yeah, yeah.
accent. And so I'm like, no, yoga comes from the Hindu Valley, basically, which is like
Mm,
India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that area. Um, and to me, that's honoring and educating where it's from.
mm.
Um, and you're saying there maybe you're attached to it, like, but maybe you're attached because you want to namaste. I think if you're forcing your students to, which I don't think you
Yeah,
are.
obviously it's, nothing is compulsory in my classes. Like,
Exactly. So then how beautiful. And I think when people don't understand where this practice comes from and when they don't understand the intention of the practice, that's when this bastardization of it comes. And that's when this you know, capitalistic
mm,
version of yoga comes from. Um, and I feel like if we had more people who understood where it came from, there'd be less of that actually.
mm,
Now, I did ask my teacher about it. I said, like, all these people online who, and like some of them are Indian, so it's like, okay, well,
mm.
who do you listen to? So, and he said something which resonated with me. He said, you'll get a lot of likes and shares when you post something like that.
Mm.
And I was like, interesting. Again, maybe I have a lot more work to do and I need to let go of it, but
Yeah.
I like to let people know that
And
this
I
is a
feel the same
practice.
as well. I feel like I'm open to someone proving me wrong, but anything I've heard someone say, it just doesn't make me feel like I don't want to stop saying it, at the end of
It's a
class.
binary view.
Mm.
Most Indian people I know want this practice to be shared because it's a gift
Mm.
to the world.
Yes.
If you're teaching and you're, disrespecting the country, the people, the practice,
Mm.
very different. If you're, what's the word I'm trying to think of? If you're like, swindling money out of people and doing
Mm.
stuff like that through the practice, very different. But if you can do your best to share that, like people in India, to bring us back on topic, live and breathe yoga. They may never step on a mat, but
Yeah.
actually so much of it is in their culture now. Loads of people don't either. They don't agree with it or don't practice it at all. Um, but because we've become obsessed with the asana,
Mm.
we think, oh, you don't have a yoga mat, therefore you don't do yoga. But actually, they might live their life by that system in a way, because it's heavily influenced from the Vedas, and the Hindu philosophies came from the Vedas as well.
Mm.
And I say philosophy because Hinduism isn't really a religion. It can be, but it's very much a philosophy to live your life by as well. So um, it's just part of how they live. And if we had more people, I feel in Europe living yoga instead of doing yoga,
Mm.
very different place. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm just conscious of your time because I feel like we could talk for ages more, and there's
Yeah,
loads
mine's
more that I
not,
want to dig into.
but
But um, yeah, I'm just conscious of your time. But is there yeah, do you want to let us know about the retreat that you have coming up? Because it does sound amazing, and it sounds like you would be a gorgeous guide to bring people. And then, is it going to? Yeah, just you tell me about it.
yeah. So I'm nearly finalized the details, but maybe by the time this goes out, it'll be
Okay.
finalized. But it's very much going to be um a yoga immersion. So
Mm.
if you're looking to explore all of India and see as much of India as possible, this is not the retreat for you. If
Yeah.
you're looking to experience yoga in its birthplace, this is for you. We will, of course, be doing touristy things as well. But it will be 5 nights in the ashram where I trained. We won't actually be to stay in the ashram because it's nearly always full of people studying
Mm.
there. But we'll be staying just outside it. But we'll be able to go in for all the classes and the meals
Mm.
and basically the whole ashram experience. And then during the day, there's plenty of time for shopping, and we'll be doing a few other
Mm.
cultural things. And then we'll be spending 2 nights in what my teacher is calling the jungle ashram, which is a new ashram he's built because where this ashram has become really overpopulated. It used to
Mm.
be able to see the Ganga River from there, the Ganges, whereas now there's loads of high rises all around
Yeah.
it. the ashram itself is still really peaceful, but it's quite busy. So he's bought some land like an hour and a half from Rishikesh in the
Fab.
middle of the jungle. It has a river running through it. It's not the Ganges, but it's a tributary of the Ganges. And he's bought the land around this area so that no one can build around them. So that's a much more like, there's no shops, there's no hospitals. It's a bit more of an immersive experience. And we'll be spending 2 nights there. And so we'll be living, breathing, eating yoga, and also having a really good time and just seeing maybe a bit of the culture. You absolutely don't have to be a yoga teacher to come, just have an interest in yoga. And there's, yeah, beautiful food, lots of time for massages. And I find with a lot of the retreats I do, it's meeting other like-minded people.
Yeah.
You know, I had some people on my last retreat who met on a previous retreat, and who are still in touch, you know, and they came back on this retreat together. Because you might have the best friends in the world, but they might not be interested in what you're doing, and you might not be able to have a conversation with them about past lives or
Yeah.
or your doshas or you
Yeah.
know, stuff like that. So it's a lovely way if you are on your own to not feel like you're alone when you're traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's lovely as well that, you know, you're coming from here and you've obviously been there and you know the lay of the land and how things work, because India can be a very overwhelming place. Like you said, people either love it or hate it. And it can be intimidating for people. Like when you land in Delhi airport, like there's so many people
Mm.
and, you know, we don't have the same population here by any means. So from, you know, if you're traveling from some remote place in Cork to Delhi, like it's a culture shock. But to have you there to know like this is how things work, this is how we get from here to here, it sounds like a very supportive experience.
Yeah, because it's really different. And like understanding things like the first time I landed in Delhi, we were on a bus and there was a man at the back of the bus outside banging the bus. And
Mm.
we were like, the driver, stop, stop. But it wasn't until we realized that actually what they do is they keep banging the back of the bus to tell them they're not in the way of anything. And when they stop
Okay.
banging,
Yeah.
whereas if we were reversing in Ireland and someone banged the back of our car,
Yeah.
we'd stop straight away. So little things like that to understand. And I'm also really conscious that this is in a way spiritual tourism. And so
Mm.
we'll be doing a session on like how to respect the local culture, what to wear.
Yeah.
I'll of course never tell people that they have to wear something, but like this
Yeah.
is what's worn. Um due to respect to the locals.
Mm.
I feel like especially in Rishikesh, there's a lot of people coming in really
Mm-hmm.
disrespecting the locals and making things really not very pleasant there for them.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing a few sessions and there'll be lots of pre-stuff. So like we'll have a meeting
Brilliant.
online beforehand to settle everyone and yeah,
Yeah.
that's coming.
Oh,
Yeah.
sounds amazing. And do you have anything else coming up that you want to tell us about? Or I'd say you
So that's
always have things on
I
the go,
always
do
have
you?
something. My 2025 schedule is nearly there, but I have at the end of September, for anyone in and around Dublin, I'm doing a restart of a yoga nidra training in Yoga Hub
Oh,
in
lovely.
Camden. I think it's the Camden Street one. I've actually never been there in human form. Um, and then after that retreat in India, I'm doing a 100-hour prenatal training, and that is in the ashram. You'll be staying in the ashram, and you'll also get a chance to go to the jungle ashram as well. So that's a 100-hour. There's 15 hours online recorded, and then 85 hours in person. And you'll be living the ashram experience and learning how to be a prenatal yoga teacher, which, you know, most people get into teaching yoga because they want to help people.
Mm.
Um, and something I love is like, imagine if every single parent and child was rested and nurtured and felt
Mm.
empowered and strong. You know, we're kind of going back to the start, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I'm just really passionate. Like, I've never wanted kids myself. I adore
Mm.
children. I've never been pregnant. I don't plan to. Maybe it would happen, but it's not in my plan.
Mm.
Um, so you don't have to be a mother, or you don't have to be a parent. And you don't have to ever plan to be one to study prenatal. If
Yeah.
anything, it gives you a really unbiased platform to
Mm.
teach from.
Mm.
And yeah, it's a beautiful practice to teach. It really informs the rest of my teaching, actually. And especially if you're teaching a lot of women, which most people do, you're
Mm.
going to be teaching people with wombs, basically. So learning
Mm.
about that is pretty important.
Yeah. Oh, it
Yeah.
sounds fab. Jeanie, thank you so much
No
for
worries.
being here and for sharing all your stories.
We can always do a part two if we need. I'm sure we could have had a
I think
3 hour
we could do a part 3 and 4 as well. And if you want to hear Jeanie talk more, she had the Uncorked podcast.
Yoga Uncorked. Yeah.
Yoga Uncorked. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's lovely listening to you. It's a really, really
Oh,
gorgeous podcast. It's you and sorry, I'm after forgetting the other woman's name.
Kelly.
Kelly. So it's just like the two of you having little chats and you seem like really good friends. And I love having you on the background. I feel like part of your little friend group. It's lovely.
Absolutely. Yeah, the most common feedback we get is that you can laugh and learn at the same time,
Yeah.
and half the time, as you'll know, is us chatting shit basically and talking about our lives. But how we do usually bring it back to yoga.
Yeah.
But we also try and bring in some yoga teachings as well. And
Yeah.
again, that's another way of making yoga accessible. It's free to
Yeah.
listen to.
Absolutely. And it goes to show that yoga can be part of everything. Like it is a whole, every aspect of your life. Because that's why it's easy to have a yoga podcast because you can relate everything to yoga.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Wasn't that lovely listening to Jeanie? She had some really lovely insights to the practice of yoga and how we can use it in our life, but also how it's really is for everybody. And especially as yoga teachers, we need to be conscious of who we're excluding from our classes, trying our best to make everybody feel welcome in this gorgeous, gorgeous practice. So I hope you enjoyed that, and well done for getting to the end of the episode. If you've gotten this far, fair play to you. I said at the start I had some other kind of thoughts running through my head that I wanted to share. And I think this is what I love about podcasts. I feel like podcasts give me really creative energy. It is a beautiful way to listen to other people's thoughts and ideas, and then that usually sparks something within me as well. So, and I think the conversation with Jeanie did kind of spark these ideas within me as well. Really, the idea of this self-study, this using yoga in our daily life and understanding ourselves, can really help us to bring us into alignment with our true self. Because I feel it's really easy to get caught up in what's air quotes normal and actually listening to what we need as individuals and to feel connected to ourselves. It's easy to go along with the status quo and not question why things are done in certain ways. So yesterday here in Ireland, we had our local and EU elections, and we had to make obviously a vote on who we want to represent us. But something that really empowers me is acknowledging that I actually have a vote every day. Every cent I spend is a vote for the type of world I want. So every time I walk into a shop, every time I order something online, I try to be as conscious I can about how those items are getting to me. I try to reflect on the processes that would have been involved in getting the item to me from the very first step through manufacturing, through transportation, and then ultimately when it gets to me. And also thinking about, is it something that's going to be of value in my life as well? And look, don't get me wrong, I fail at this often, and sometimes my desires overtake these conscious decisions. Sometimes I just go, oh, you know what, I want that, and I buy it. And it's more rare now. I'm definitely getting better at making more conscious decisions. But I think as a society, and especially as yoga practitioners, we have to use these practices that do help to raise our conscious vibrations in ways that are going to create a better world. So every time you walk into a supermarket, thinking about where your food comes from. And honestly, if I'm going to be real about this, I have to voice my opinion and say, I think we've gone past the stage now. We need to acknowledge that this idea of the happy pig on the farm or the happy cow, like, do we really buy into that? Do we really believe that the cows and the pigs and the chickens are happy? Do we really still believe that there is a humane way to slaughter a being, a living, sentient being? And I'm trying to be really conscious about how I'm speaking about this, because when Jeanie mentioned about the vegan activist, like I mentioned earlier on, I do have that fire element within me, and I can get very hot-headed, and being vegan is a part of my life that I am very dedicated to. And when I see people around me unconsciously buying into this idea that the happy cow with the lovely farmer who cares for him, the meat or the animal products got onto their plate, or the animal products got into your cleaning products or your self-care products or into your clothes, it's so hard to stay calm about that. But it's something I try to do, because it definitely, this violent activism is not something I want to participate in either. So maybe you've already switched off now. Maybe you're going, no, I don't need to listen to this. And that's fine. But it's also, this is a way of me being active and in a non-violent way. I'm not threatening anyone. Everyone has their own decision. I'm trying as best I can to maybe encourage you to really be more conscious, to think about how are you spending your money. So yeah, it's all well and good thinking that that we've all done our duty and we went out to vote yesterday. Just remember that today you're voting. Even by listening to this podcast, it's a vote in some way of what type of content you want more of in your life. The more people that listen to this, the more people that press the follow and share buttons, the more this will be suggested to people. And it's the same with our food. It's the same with our clothes. It is the same with everything that we spend money on. If we want to create a more peaceful and a fairer world, we need to stop voting for companies that are very unfair, companies that are not inclusive, companies that promote violence. If we are yoga practitioners and we're practicing ahimsa, are we just passing on the book to someone else saying, oh, well, the company did it, I didn't? But if we're voting for that company through the money that we give it, are we participating in violence in some way? So I think that idea of reduce, reuse, recycle is really, really important. With the likes of our mobile phones and our computers, there are many, many different companies out there now that take in old laptops and phones and they fix them up and they resell them. So we're reusing them rather than constantly going for new items. And there are shops that will fix your mobile phone, so you can get your screens fixed, you can get your batteries fixed instead of replacing them all the time. And as far as food goes, it's a difficult one because people have a very emotional attachment to food, but it's something I would deeply encourage you to sit and think about and to really feel, does giving money to companies that practice violence, does that align with your actual values? Just because you're not doing it yourself doesn't mean it's not happening. So really tuning into the practice of self-study and understanding, what values do you have, what truly aligns with yourself, and knowing that you're not part of that is quite a nice feeling. And a lot of people see it as, oh, vegans are so smug. And look, I don't look down my nose to anybody. I ate meat for years, for most of my life. I participated in eating meat and animal products. And then I learned more about where it came from, and I decided that it wasn't something that I wanted to be part of anymore. And I made a change. And it was as simple as that. And most of the people I know, my families and friends, most of them still eat meat. I'm from the countryside in Ireland. I actually know loads of farmers, and they're beautiful people. I grew up with a lot of people who lived on farms. I grew up beside farmers. So it really isn't a judgmental thing. I just feel called to share some of the questions that I asked myself. And when I asked myself if I was going to live in alignment with who I truly am, well, then I had to change some of the aspects of my life. And it really wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. I initially thought, oh, if I give up all these animal products, I'm going to be sick and I'm going to get really skinny and I'm going to be so unhealthy. And it absolutely wasn't the case. I've been vegan now for about 10 years and I am happy and I'm healthy, and I just hope the same for you. So again, thank you so much. Definitely thank you so much if you've gotten to listen to this much of the podcast. I would love any of your feedback. If you've questions for the podcast, send them in. If you've anybody you'd like to hear on the podcast, please let me know. Please do like, follow, and share the podcast as much as you can. Tell your friends about it. And I will talk to you next week. Thanks a million.